the two, and why I put these two up to compare, look at where her eyes are versus where his eyes are, presumably, since we see the back of his head. But assuming he's looking at the ball, that changes, one, where you're looking when you land, two, your awareness and what senses you're using to land, and three, it's ultimately going to change your body posture when you land. So the ball and the opponent are the two biggest things that I want to point out. The opponent because of the physical contact, and the ball because of what it does for your posture, especially. So if you printed out the slides, this slide is out of order. I think it's probably 6 more slides down. We'll come back to everybody else. I just kind of changed it around because it goes with what I was just talking about. So this is one theory or one classification used for motor learning to differentiate the complexity of skills. So I just picked out a couple of general exercises that one might use to train for landings or jumping. So essentially, your top left-hand corner is going to be your least complex skill, and down to the bottom right is going to be the most complex skill. So as you go across, body weight squats, okay, the object manipulation is, having to manipulate an object, use something. So the difference between a body weight squat and back squat is essentially having to use the bar. A box jump, okay, you're not really manipulating an object, okay, but you're still in a stationary condition. And then the intertrial variability is, does every repetition, is there variation? So if I'm jumping on the same size box, 5 times in a row, there's no variation between the jumps. Whereas in a repeat varied hurdle jump, if I have a 6-inch hurdle, 12-inch hurdle, 18, 12, 6, 18, okay, there's variation between the hurdles. All right, so it becomes a more complex skill. And then finally, we get down to a game situation where there's going to be a varied environment, ball and the opponent, and you're going to be in motion. Okay, and then again, when I use the game jump stop off the dribble, so you're manipulating the ball. You're dribbling the ball, having to use the ball as you make your jump stop. All right. So from a practice standpoint, or from a teaching standpoint, in terms of the jump landings, what you're doing in game is far more complex than many of the exercises that one would use to teach jump landings in a strength training situation. So the idea being that if we truly want to prepare players for both for performance enhancement and for injury prevention, strength is a big factor. Okay, a big factor. You can't ignore strength and all variations of strength, as Ray said. But there's also the skill involved as well. Okay, and the tax complexity of the skill. So strength is definitely a start, and I guess I should have said it's beginning, but I love what Ray had to say, and a lot of things, especially since he was talking about female basketball players, hopefully what I'm saying kind of complements a lot of what he had to say, but just looks at it from a different angle. Okay, so I don't want to seem like I'm ignoring the strength component. I'm looking at the other side of it, okay, and trying to bring kind of the coaching perspective and the on-court part of it to add once you've developed that strength and in conjunction with the development of the strength. Being able to transition and transfer that strength development into game performance in terms of more complex skills. All right, so on to the jump landings of the jump stop. So, some basic stats about ACL injuries. I got this study, the top one from Hewitt. He was one of the co-authors. He wasn't the main author, but he was one of the co-authors. He is the director at the Cincinnati Children's Hospital. This is probably one of the big names in ACL injury prevention programs. So, again, if you look at the two studies, most injuries occur with the ball, or with the ball involved, whether it's from the rebound attacking. They didn't specify exactly what attacking, but I assume either attacking with a dribble, shooting, something of that nature, going up for a layup. Okay, and then the other study, the earlier study, found that rebounding is the most cited. So again, it's not that ACL injuries are happening in isolation. They do happen. I watched a girl that I trained when she was younger tear her ACL. What ended up being the last game of her high school career. She was, at the time, the #1 or #2 player in the nation as a senior in high school. And it was the most freak. I've seen, I think, 3 girls tear their ACL in person, and I still couldn't tell you how she did it. There was 1 minute she was dribbling here, and then she looked, and then she was on the ground. And so, some happen, you know, in crazy isolated incidents, but most ACLs are going to happen in an environment with the ball or with a person involved. All right, so this is just you know, kind of expanding on that, the original study. So most of them involved the landing. And in addition to the landing, most of them involve a player being in the vicinity for that landing. So again, when we're in the weight room thinking about how can we prevent injuries, we have to take into consideration that if we're just doing tuck jumps or box jumps or hurdle jumps in isolation, that's not the same skill that's causing the injuries in a game. Okay? It is, I mean, it is the jumping and the landing that's causing, but it's a more complex skill that happens in the game, and that's what adds to the injuries. So again, showing the difference between a defender being involved for a cutting, and then also the overhead goal. So for rebounding, you know, if there's an overhead goal, it's going to affect my landing technique or my biomechanics. So the coaching solution. This is from the article in the New York Times. Essentially, I mean, this has nothing to do with jump landings, but basically taking an approach that if there's a chance that it might cause injury, we'll try to avoid that situation, right? So, a good tactic. You know, if you knew that something was likely to cause injury, try to avoid it. But the problem is, as much as, you know, they put this rule into place about not passing past a certain point, once you get in a game and there's defensive pressure and you see somebody open and you need a basket late in the game, how many players are going to be able to think, oh wait, no, we have this rule, so I'm not going to make the pass, versus, you know, no, I'm going to go for it, we need the layup. In a game situation, things happen. So as much as you want to try to take away or limit players, you can't limit all the scenarios of a game. All right? So I know several basketball coaches on the West Coast whose answer to jump stops causing, put in italics, ACL injuries is to eliminate jump stops. All right? We're just not going to jump stop anymore because it's jump stop's fault that girls are tearing their ACL. All right? Whether you jump stop or you're 1-2, you have to decelerate. You can't play basketball and get rid of deceleration and jump landings. It wouldn't be a game. So essentially, to me, they're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. All right? If jump stops are causing them, rather than looking at how can we improve the jump stops, or, well, they have to stop in some way, we're just going to get rid of one skill and then hope for the best.